Bowling off this edition of the SportsMax Zone with cricket. On Thursday, the West Indies and India will wrap up their two-match series, playing the 100th test between both teams. The West Indies were soundly beaten in the first test by an innings and 141 runs, the 11th largest margin of defeat which India have inflicted on an opponent in their 91 years playing the format. This has prompted great criticism of the West Indies, not only regionally, but now also from international voices. Former Indian opening batsman Aakash Chopra has reignited the debate as to whether Test cricket should have a two-tier system. The 45-year-old going as far as calling for the Caribbean side to be stripped of Test status. They won't be playing in the World Cup in all three formats. They are lagging behind in the rankings. Eventually, there has to be a threshold. I have been talking about that tier system, promotion and relegation. Just because they are an erstwhile champion side, till when can you carry on with them as a test playing nation? The team, as such, is doing nothing. He continues. Their case is unique because they have separate islands. Their pitches are so slow. You saw it in Dominica and you will see it at Port of Spain as well. It's not a bad idea. Maybe the island teams might play with more pride. All said and done, the West Indies' state of cricket is quite bad. The five fingers are split and everyone is thinking about themselves, be it Jamaica, Barbados, Antigua or Guyana. There is hardly any coordination. During their prime, Clive Lloyd kept them together. This team needs leadership because it's a scattered side. Every island nation has their own anthem. As it is, things were difficult and then players became T20 journeymen. The pride in playing for the West Indies has reduced. That coming from the former Indian opening batsman Aakash Chopra. Is there validity to this claim? Should the West Indies be stripped of Test status? Should there be a two-tier system? Joining us, former West Indies batsman Carlisle Best, played between 1986 and 1990 for the West Indies, 8 Test matches, and a cricket commentator and analyst Fazeer Mohammed. Gentlemen, it's great to have you on the SportsMax Zone. How are you doing this afternoon? First of all, Mr. Best, it's a pleasure to have you on our show for what I think is the very first time.
Yes, indeed. I want to thank you very much for inviting me. And I think it is the first time. I'm almost sure of that. But it's certainly a pleasure this evening to join you. And my good friend Faz. I don't know if Faz remembers me. I don't remember a lot of conversation with Faz, but he's always been one who admires a cricket commentator.
Yeah, well, I tell you something about Faz. He has been on this show more than the West Indies have played India in Test cricket. So it's been quite a lot. Faz, let me start with you though. Where do you stand on this debate? For me, it's a two-tier debate. One is, should you have a two-tiered system? The other, should the West Indies be stripped of Test status? Where are you?
Well, with the greatest respect, Ricardo, this isn't a debate at all.
Oh dear.
Because none of what was said by Aakash Chopra is either new or stands up to scrutiny. What this is all about is getting attention. This is about, in a media-dominated environment, about saying something that is very current, very au courant, very might sound sensational, might sound disrespectful of the West Indies, with the intention of generating responses so it can stay alive. Because what Aakash Chopra said, and everything he said, reveals his ignorance of West Indies cricket history. And of course, yes, we are at a very, very low ebb. No one is debating that. But essentially, what this is in the same vein of a Michael Vaughan, 2016, 2017, a Darren Gough a few years before that, many other English writers, Mark Nicholas has talked about playing as separate territories. And again, it gains currency because these are individuals who are well known in the game, who are speaking in an environment where there's a lot of media. And indeed, whatever Carlisle will say now will carry forward for a little while, but we are tiny territories. And therefore, our attempts to contradict what is said by purely representing the facts will disappear into thin air, because again, India, Australia, England, they dominate not just the game and economically, they dominate the narratives. So Aakash Chopra has done exactly what he would have intended to do by just simply stirring up a discussion that cannot stand up to scrutiny.
All right, let me get the opening remarks from Mr. Best. How do you see it?
Well, again, I endorse all that Faz has said, but again, it is funny that we're having a discussion at a time when the only two test teams that is allowed to play 5 tests, the Ashes series, is taking place. We're having that disparity, that I don't want to say racism, could be discrimination. Same time we're seeing that right in front of our eyes as we speak. We're also talking about removing West Indies from status. So that contradiction in itself is perplexing and therefore difficult to even consider any serious notion of removing West Indies test status. That's my opening remark. Just explain to me how do you reconcile the only 2 test playing countries that play 5 tests on a consistent basis, I think on a 2-year basis, and nobody else is allowed to do that. And at the same time, you're telling me that the test status from West Indies should be removed. It's diabolical nonsense. I want to say at the outset that while all the evidence points to a steep and rapid decline in our cricket, it does not elevate itself to being removed from test status. What I believe has to happen is there has to be a wake-up call for West Indies. And in that wake-up call, a serious cry and a demand for excellence, for a policy of zero tolerance to failure. We have to start recycling the same players who continue to fail time after time. And we have to find that leadership, that middle ground where the selection of a team is purely on merit and not from the territory from which somebody's from, whether it be the president or the captain. We've had too many decades of that kind of insularity, which has compromised or powerful or any powerful presence of West Indies cricket on the international stage.
Yeah, gentlemen, I don't like to, but let me play devil's advocate for a second here. So I think we can all agree that for sure it is nonsense about West Indies losing test status. As you pointed out, Faz, the discussion around a 2-tier test system is nothing new. I think it came up as recently as 2016 when a number of teams, a number of boards, including the BCCI, rubbished the idea and said no to the idea of a 2-tiered system. Carlisle just spoke about Australia and England, the only teams allowed to play a 5-test match series. Would a 2-tiered system solve a lot of the issues in terms of having more competitive cricket, more competitive test cricket, and also having a situation where teams would be able to play, let's say, more matches in a series because of that competitiveness that we talk about?
Absolutely not, Ricardo. And let me just put it in context for you. Basically, and this is to Carlisle's point, when he asked about the Ashes series, and of course India occasionally get 4 or 5 test matches because it's the big 3 who run the game, that essentially we already have a 2-tier system. If you have the lesser playing nations getting no more than a couple tests or 3 tests or a one-off test, then it's already a two-tier system. And therefore, the opportunities for young players to develop their skills in the most challenging form of the game is already compromised. And therefore, naturally, but just by unless you can have the resources and the wherewithal and the vision, which we don't have in the Caribbean, as far as vision, far less anything else, to save the game and resurrect the game from the grassroots, the game is going to suffer compared to those who are playing a lot more and a lot more often. Second point, if we're talking competitiveness, what the ICC are doing, and I say ICC because the ICC is allowing this at the behest of India, Australia, and England, is the emasculation of the West Indies, of Pakistan, of New Zealand, of Bangladesh, of Zimbabwe, of South Africa, all these nations, for the single purpose of economics and revenue.
But let me ask you, Faz, if you have a situation where you have promotion and relegation, where each team in that setup, whether it be 10, 12 or 14 teams, have the opportunity to be promoted or can be relegated.
Ricardo, forgive my rudeness, but let me jump in right away.
No, fine.
Because do you think the English or the Australians will stomach being relegated if it were to happen to their cricket and no Ashes series being played every 2 years?
Well, what do you think would happen?
What I think would happen is that they would make a caveat, which they've already talked about. Because I had this discussion already. I had this discussion with Michael Vaughan in England in 2017, and I drew the parallels of Huddersfield Town in the English Premier League, who had just come back up to the top. Huddersfield Town, in case nobody knows, were the first team to win 3 consecutive English League titles. That was somewhere around the 1920s, 1930s. And of course, they've seen hard times since then. If they were a test-playing nation, they would only be allowed to play 45-minute games against the big guns. And I asked Michael Vaughan, does that make sense? And obviously he said no. And again, it brings us to that point. And I said, well, okay, if we're talking two-tier system, it means promotion and relegation. What would happen if either England or Australia are relegated? He said, well, no, you can't touch the Ashes. That's sacred. I said, well, you're talking rubbish. Because either you want it or you don't. Essentially, as I said again, this is about a narrative that takes us nowhere other than just reinforcing that the powers that be would like us to be distracted from the way they are destroying the broader competitiveness of international cricket.
Yeah, and I want to support your point a little bit, Faz, before I have Mariah and Lance enter this discussion, that in the proposals of 2016 from the ICC that only 5 months of the year would be used for matches within that two-tier system, and the other months they would allow for teams to be able to set up matches between themselves, and that would also include, let's say, if an England or Australia were to be relegated, they would still be able to have the Ashes, even though they would be in separate categories. So just to support the point that you have just made, Lance.
Yeah, I want to move away from that because I'm happy that both Carlisle and Fazir agree with the point that I made earlier on. We see FIFA expanding the number of teams competing in the World Cup finals from 32 to 46. So I'm not sure why the West Indies, ranked 8th in Test cricket at the moment, should find themselves out of the top tier of cricket. But Carlisle, since we have you here, we know that your Test career wasn't as long as many people feel it could or should have been based on the quality batsman you are. We had Courtney Walsh in the show here a couple of weeks ago talking about the decline of West Indies cricket. Can you, Carlisle, in a nutshell, compare what was cricket like in Barbados for you as a youngster developing your craft and what you're seeing now? Because obviously there is a vast difference between what happened in the 60s and 70s to what is happening now with regard to developing and producing world-class cricketers.
Well, Lance, the comparison is multi-faceted because compared with the time I played, there were not very many organized tournaments and tours and so on. And that's the first thing. Cricket is a lot more complex in terms of tournaments and opportunities to play at home and abroad. That's the first comparison. But the real difference, the decisive difference in my view, has to do with the mentality, the philosophy, the desire, the love, the need to play cricket at the highest level. And of course, you had great names before you that you wanted to emulate. I used to call myself Gordon Greenwich, believe it or not. And then at some point was able to share a room as a West Indian player with the same Gordon Greenwich, the same hero, the man who was a hero for me. So that's the fundamental difference. How do we get back there in the current environment? It's extremely challenging as to how we get back to how it was in the 60s and 70s and 80s. It perhaps is not possible to get back there.
Can I stop you quickly, Carlisle? Can I stop you for one moment? Because I hear what you just said. So are you suggesting that there are current players now who want to be Chris Gales and want to be Brian Lara in the way that you wanted to be Gordon Greenwich?
I'm not sure. I've been with many youngsters, and I ask them very often, who are their favorite players? And sometimes they look bewildered. They just don't have that vision, that ambition. They have not modeled themselves in terms of who they would like to be and what kind of performances, what kind of career they would want to have. It happens that young. Very few of them can speak definitively as to who they like and who they want to be like and what career path that they want to follow. It's difficult. It's difficult. I've met with a lot of youngsters in recent times where that clear vision is not as clear as it ought to be. I knew who I want to be. I told a friend of mine, and he reminded me only the other day that at 13 years old, I said I want to play Test cricket for West Indies. I don't know if that desire, that mentality still exists today. But you know what? With so many distractions, so many little tournaments here and there, people reside in a comfort zone that perhaps does not allow them to really catapult themselves and force themselves onto the regional and international stage.
Yes.
So again, as I said, the problem through the years have become very complex and it's very difficult to solve. I mean, at this short notice, I haven't been able to do sufficient research to put my finger on any particular area in which we can pursue that will recover that tremendously lost ground that we've had in West Indies cricket. Yes, ma'am.
And I listen to you, and of course I understand, but we have to move quick because we're almost out of time for this segment. We're going to just talk quickly about that big test that's coming up, the second test. It heads to Port of Spain in Trinidad and Tobago. So Faz, this one's for you. What are we expecting from the Windies as they take on this second test?
Well, given the fact that, of course, Raymond Reefer has been dropped, I would expect Cook Mackenzie to make his debut, possibly at the number 3. Sean Gabriel to come in as a frontline fast bowler, and Kevin Sinclair to also get a debut, because there seems to be concerns about Rakeem Cornwall's health and fitness, because we really haven't been made clear as to exactly what his challenge would have been. But whatever 11 the West Indies put on the field, they're going to be massive underdogs to the Indians, because the feeling is that maybe a bit more pace could put the Indians in trouble and so on. Well, that was in the 70s and the 60s and maybe a bit of the early 80s as well. A lot of Indian batsmen are accustomed to pace and bounce. So I think they're well attuned, they're confident, they dominated the West Indies in the first test match, and I don't expect it to be any different in the second unless there's significant intervention by the rain.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to see how that second test, unfolds. Carlisle, I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's your first time, but I'm pretty sure we're looking forward to talk to you again very, very soon. Thank you so much. And Faz, don't go anywhere because we have to talk some Ashes. Stay with SportsMax on YouTube and follow us on all social pages for updates, news and entertainment.